So another question, that comes up a lot, I suppose, is people saying this is the current state of Israel. It's just all a Rothschild's creation. It's the international bankers, and they want the land for themselves, and it's the Luciferians and all of that. And yes, the Rothschilds did have a big part to play. You can't deny that that they did have a big role to play in the setting up of the state of Israel, But that doesn't nullify to me that God had a plan. He can even use wicked people to bring his plan to pass.
He uses wicked people all the time. I mean, all you got to do is, read the Old Testament that he used Assyria to judge northern Israel. Isaiah 10, he calls Assyria my servant. And he used Nebuchadnezzar to judge Judah. And so there's no doubt that God uses wicked people all the time to accomplish his sovereign purposes. So I would say the same thing, that if you look, I would agree with that statement to a degree, that I would say it this way. People that say that the Rothschilds or whatever international secular satanic Luciferians were involved, I would say, my question is, what's your ultimate point? Is your ultimate point that somehow delegitimizes the people that are there as not being a miracle or being in the sovereign plan of God? If that's what you're saying, I disagree. But if you're simply saying that God uses these wicked people, these socialists, many of them were atheists. David Ben-Gurion, these guys were agnostic and secularists. So if you're simply saying that there were secularists and atheists and others that did not worship the God of Israel established in the state, I agree, of course. That's a fact of history. But if you're making the point that God can't use wicked people to accomplish his purposes, I would disagree with that for biblical reasons. And so that's really the important thing, is to have a balanced perspective on all this, because some people, they run and they go, well, if the Rothschilds are involved, that means God's not involved. Whoa, where'd you get that idea?
Yeah.
That's again, I just gave several examples. I mean, in Acts chapter 4, we see that God used Herod, the Jews, the Gentiles, and the Romans to kill Jesus. So, but we know God predestined it. That's what Acts 4:27-28 says. But he used wicked four separate groups or demographics to accomplish his purpose. Isaiah 53:10 says that it pleased the Lord to crush him, this messianic figure. So no doubt God was involved, but he used wicked people to accomplish the greatest work of salvation history ever, which was the cross. So to think that God couldn't use wicked people, Rothschilds and others, to accomplish a miracle of modern Israel in order to get them to the point of being saved at the end, then I think people don't understand their biblical theology.
That's true. I agree. Another point that I get a lot of people at times saying, the whole what's going on in the world, this was all because Albert Pike foretold it in a letter, to Mazzini. I've basically debunked that. I did a few years ago an article and a video where I proved that there was never a 3 world wars letter. Albert Pike never wrote any such letter. It doesn't even appear until the 1950s, when we've already had the First World War, the Second World War, and the State of Israel is already in existence. So there never was an Albert Pike letter. And I think I've pretty much proved that in the article and the video I did. So that's another mute point that, gets thrown out a lot with what's going on today. So I don't know, with the war that's going on at the moment, obviously, and potentially to escalate, people can use that as this is all pre-planned because of that Albert Pike letter and so on and so forth. But yeah, something big is going on in the Middle East, and I don't know how far is this going to lead to World War III. What's it going to do? It's certainly looking pretty ominous at the moment, but I don't know what your thoughts are on the current situation with the wars. It
is so hard to, as any of us, it's so hard to predict where this current situation is going in Israel specifically. The other, because we have several factors. I mean, you on a different, maybe a separate shelf, is you have Russia with Ukraine. We don't know where that's going.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say there's a chance for World War to be precipitated would be based, if I was to make odds, which again, not a prophet.
Yeah. I
would think that World War III would come more out of the Russia Ukraine situation than Israel. Even though because over there it's more isolated. We've seen Israel certainly take out Hamas. What Hamas did on October 7th was horrible. I mean, if anybody denies that, then they're anti-Semitic. They're anti-human. I mean, that was horrible. What happened? Cooking children in ovens and everything else.
There is people that are saying that a lot of the people that died on October the 7th was the Israel's own forces coming in and indiscriminately killing whom they thought was Hamas with helicopters and things, and they ended up killing a lot of about half of the people that died were killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, I can't say whether that's true or false.
Yeah, and I've heard some of the rumors, but at the end of the day, hey, I'm open to anything if there's evidence, and what I haven't seen some real document evidence. And here's the reason I say that is, if you look at the response of the Israeli Defense Forces on that day, where there's 1,200 were killed, they were very slow to respond, and so most of the atrocities happened within a couple hours, and of course the hostages were taken back inside Gaza before the IDF even showed up to kill anybody. And so I would question that, but again, I don't have all knowledge. But the fact of the matter is, what you do see, Israel's response is, there's no doubt that Hamas cannot rule Gaza. I mean, all the tunnels, instead of building nice beach houses for their people, they're building tunnels and war machines. They have received billions and billions and billions of dollars. I mean, honestly, Gaza, its location is beautiful. It's got beachfront. And that Hamas totally betrayed their people, and could have taken all that money. And as we've seen recently with all of these fat cats, these leaders, either they're living over in Qatar, they're worth billions of dollars. I mean, they're siphoning all this money while their own people are starving. They're using their people. They're putting these terrorist things in hospitals. I mean, it's just horrible. So what I see there with Israel going in and cleaning that up, and now, of course, cleaning up the north of Lebanon, I actually was surprised at how inept Hezbollah was. People are talking about hundreds of thousands of missiles, and when they knew that Israel was coming in, why didn't they launch them 50,000 at the same time? They for whatever reason, we don't know, and obviously I'm glad they didn't, because for them, if anybody doesn't recognize that what we've seen, for the most part, again, nobody knows everything, but Israel puts leaflets out. They do not specifically target civilians in the same way. Let's say that some people think they do. Okay. Well, I would say, are you saying that they target civilians in the same way that Hamas or Hezbollah targets civilians? They're launching missiles randomly that are hitting, kids at schools, everything else, where at least Israel has shown itself to be very precise. I mean, look at what happened in Iran or Beirut. They're taking out these floors. So it's very precise. They're not just carpet bombing, which again is a tactic of war, which is exactly what Hamas, they're carpet missiling, if you wanted to say it that way. So all that being said, where's this going? Well, it'll be interesting to see. This is where there's one open-ended puzzle here. When Israel retaliates for the latest 200 missiles sent by Iran, of course, they sent them back in April and they sent them just a few weeks ago. When Israel responds to that event, that'll be interesting, whether it escalates or, as we saw last time. Remember when in April, when Iran sent the missiles, Israel had a very isolated response, and then Iran just kind of faded. I was like, I thought this was going to explode, and it didn't. So who knows what Israel's going to do this time? But could it fade away again? They're going to do a ground invasion, because as we know, I have some friends who are Israeli reservists, and they're being called up. Like, they were here in America and they're being called up. So they are going back to go into a ground invasion into Lebanon. So
I see,
will that
the
lead to
one
World War
problem
III?
I have with it is, and you hear Netanyahu talking about how we're going to win this war, and basically, but you can't blast an ideology away. You can kill Sinwar and you can kill this one and that one, but that isn't going to stop the ideology. So it's like this. How long is a piece of string? You get you kill this one, and then the next one steps up, and all it does is it's not going to make friends out of the people. They're not going to be thinking, as their homes are destroyed and everything around them. It's like they're not going to go, thank you, Israel. This is just what we were hoping for. So all it's going to do is escalate more and more hatred too. So I just can't see how this, ends well. Put it that way.
Agreed. 100% agreed. I don't think that I don't think there's ever going to be just everybody's going to be getting along, peace in the Middle East in the sense all the way until the end. There's wars are determined. Yeah. It is interesting to me that when Nasrallah was killed, the leader of Hezbollah, that there were lots of people in Syria passing out candies. They loved it. They loved Israel for it because they hate Hezbollah. Yeah. So even the Muslims, with the Shiites and the Sunnis despise one another, but there's no doubt what you see in the land. What does the rebuilding look like in Gaza? I mean, with billions of dollars, are they ever gonna be like, hey, they're gonna build their beachfront properties? Highly doubtful. Yeah. Because why? A generation of young people in the very schools, as you said, are trained in this ideology. It is not going to. This is one of the things that they've talked about is that when whoever is going to come and rule in Gaza, which will not be Hamas, that they have to start with a new educational system. Because if you don't change that, which again, this is now part of talking about how do you eradicate an entire religion? You can't. That's why I don't see that changing. There's always going to be radicals. I would say this, though. There is an interesting element if you put in Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries, they're more economic than they are religious, no doubt, but they have their own economic reasons. And so they don't care about the Palestinians. That Salman from Saudi Arabia, the crown prince, is like, listen, we don't really care about the Palestinian issue. Hamas has caused this is their problem. They voted these people in, and then they turn around and wonder why their leadership betrayed them. So they don't really care about that. So it is possible that if there was some sort of Abrahamic Accords, that maybe Saudi Arabia or some other group would come in order to manage or to rule in a way, which I find that you're talking about Shiites and Sunnis. That's going to be highly problematic. Are these Shiites going to want Saudi Arabia coming in? They're aligned with Iran, which Iran and Saudi Arabia are sworn enemies. So there's peace in our time. This is going to be it's a forced neutrality based on Israel's greater force that they have in order just to subjugate it. But I think you said it right. Will the people in Gaza come out in support of Israel and say this is wonderful? I doubt it.
Not when it's been half destroyed.
Exactly. I can't see it either.
But there's that picture of Sinwar with the little toddler with the AK-47 or whatever it is. I mean, that just shows you,
he's a coward. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, and there's a kid holding it, but it's training these little kids from that size to hate. And use guns and then people go that these are the oppressed people. I mean, any other country, Western country, you wouldn't bring up your children like that. No. And so people that are in support of that and supporting Hamas and all that. To me, it's just really out there. You got to really examine who they are and what are they really teaching. What are they, how are they raising their population? So something, I don't know. Like I said, I can't see an ideology being wiped out by force. It doesn't matter how much Israel bombs and goes in there and destroys this one and takes out that leader. That's not going to destroy the ideology. It has to be something from within the people that would want to go, we've had a guts full of these, I mean, like Hamas and Hezbollah and all that. That's the only way it can really be turned around, not by another country like Israel coming in and destroying this person in that bunker, and it won't end. So anyone that thinks it's just going to end because they put the heaviest boot down, I don't see that happening. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents worth on it. But having said that, even though I don't necessarily agree with how Israel's handling things, I still believe in Israel being in the land and so on. So
yeah, exactly. I mean that really it comes down to that recognition of God's promises. And again, even God himself was. I mean, anybody has to just read the Old Testament, read the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. God was very displeased with his people most of the time, and he, read the book of Judges. He sends oppressors to bring them back to himself because they were unrighteous and they themselves were not following what God commanded. And so there were no good kings in the north, in the northern kingdom, and at all, and there were a handful in the south. So the fact of the matter is, most of the Old Testament was God trying to reach his people because of that. And so in the same way, what we see is we're living in biblical times, in that God's desire is going to reach his people spiritually through their Messiah, Jesus. But at the same time, what we're seeing, I find it interesting that every development here is, right now, I ask the question, who or what does Israel trust in for their existential survival, their security? They trust in themselves. They're not trusting in the God of Israel.
Yeah.
They're not giving him praise, even though I think he is certainly keeping them around. But he's keeping them around for his own namesake, as you mentioned in Ezekiel 38. I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for my own name. So as long as we keep a balanced approach, we can navigate these waters, of extremes, and say, listen, let's keep it balanced. And I think there's enough scriptural information to do that.